Welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this hands-on lab, I'm going to look at, first of all, configuring the command line interface and then using it to communicate with some of the AWS services. So I'm just now in the Windows PowerShell tools for AWS, but if you're using the command line interface through the Windows command line, or you're using it through Mac or Linux, it'll be exactly the same. The commands are still identical. There's no difference whatsoever there with it. I just prefer to use Windows PowerShell. It gives me a little bit more to use. So the first thing we need to do is to identify whether or not the command line interface has been installed correctly. So we just do AWS -- and then version, and that will tell us what version we've got, hopefully. So you can see there it comes back, it says I've got the AWS command line interface 1.1175. So if you don't get that back or something similar to that, then your command line interface hasn't been installed properly. So what you need to do is make sure that the path to the command line interface is actually specified in your environment variables. So just go back and check your environment variables, make sure it's in there. If not, they're manually added in. So that's how we can have a look at how AWS is installed and what version we've got on there. If we've got an old version or whatever, we can go back and update it. We can also look at if we need some documentation within the program. We have help built into the command line interface. So we can just do AWS help, and it'll give us basically what is in the command line interface reference. So you can see there the AWS command line interface. It's a unified tool to manage your AWS services. If we keep pressing enter, we can go through and read all that, but we won't, so we'll just Control-C out of that. So the other thing we can look at is that there are a number of commands available. So we can just do AWS command help, and that will list all of the commands available for us. So you can see there all of the services available for us. So you can see basically every service that's on AWS can be accessed through the command line interface. So I'm just going to check the AWS S3. So I can just do AWS S3, and then I can do help on that again, and that will give us a listing of the specific help for Amazon S3 with the command line interface. And so you can see there's the help screen. We can keep pressing enter. You can see there's a CP command or a copy command. So we could use that later on as well, and we will use that later on. We'll use this with a couple of other services and see how it works. So I just Control-C out of that again, clear the screen. Now, in order to use a command line interface, we need to have a set of credentials that we need to configure in the command line interface tools. Otherwise, we could have anyone install the command line interface and then access our AWS resources, which is obviously something that's not going to happen. So what we need to do is we need to tell the command line interface, we need to give it a set of credentials, those being our access key and our secret access key. We also need to tell the command line interface what region we will be accessing in the AWS global infrastructure. And we also need to tell the command line interface what output format we want to come back to us on the screen with its return messages, and we normally have those as JSON or text. So the command we use there is AWS configure. So you type in AWS configure, and what it'll do, will start to ask you those questions. So it'll ask you for your AWS access key ID. It'll then ask you for your secret access key. It'll then ask you for the region that you want to access, be it US East or whatever region it is, and then it'll ask you for your output format. So I've already set this one up, so I won't do that for now. So we'll just give you time to do that yourself and then come back, and then should be ready to rock and roll and start using the command line interface on your own infrastructure. Okay, so just assume that you've gone away, you've done the configure command, and you've put your access key and secret access key, and you've got AWS command line interface all set up. Let's have a look at connecting to the Amazon S3 service and use the command line interface to create a bucket and delete that bucket afterwards. So the command we need there is AWS S3 MB, and then we do S3://// and then we have the name of a bucket that we want to create. So I'm just going to call this one maybe backspace something or other. Okay, so I'll call it backspace lab CLI test and see how that goes. Okay, so it's made that bucket for us, which is pretty cool. We can check if that bucket has been created. We can just go into back into the command line interface, and the command that we're looking for is AWS S3 for the S3 service and LS to list the buckets that are on this account. So we just enter that in, and it'll come back, and sure enough, it's got our backspace -lab-cli that test bucket has been created for us. So I'm just going to clear the screen. There is another command that we can use. It is like it's the same command, AWS S3 LS, but then we have the bucket name. So the S3 : / and then the bucket name, and that will list all of the objects that are inside that bucket. Now we don't have any objects inside that bucket, but I'll still just do the command and see what happens. And so there you can see that we've got these command line interfaces came straight back to us with no errors, but it also came back with no information. And the reason it did that is because there are no objects inside of that bucket to list. So just one final command I'm going to do on the Amazon S3 service, and that is to remove the bucket that we've just created. So the command we're looking for there is, instead of making a bucket, MB, we use RB. Exactly the same as before, and same as the LS command for listing a bucket as well. So it's AWS S3 and then RB for remove bucket. And we've got the S3 and then the bucket name that we want to remove. So I'll just enter on that and just see what happens. Okay, it's come back with remove bucket, backspace lab CLI test. So that's fine. That's how we create a bucket, and we can also look at putting stuff inside that bucket if we want. So I'll leave that up to you to have a bit of a play around with. Upload a file into this directory that you're using at your command line, and see if you can transfer that file to your bucket and back again, and then delete it from your bucket and all that sort of thing. And you do that using the AWS S3 CP command, because that's a pretty common command that you would use with the command line tools. And I'll give you an example. If you want to just get a file into your EC2 instance or whatever you're doing, you can just go straight into your EC2 instance, SSH into it, do an AWS command, a CP command, and copy that file that you need on your EC2 instance and just put it on there. It's really easy to do, and so it's something that you kind of should get a little bit used to, so you might find that it comes in handy later on. So I'll just look at some other services. So we've got the AWS EC2, so let's have a look at AWS EC2, and we'll do the help on that as well and see what we get. Okay, so you can see there that we've got a lot of commands available to us from the EC2 service. So let's just scroll through some of these, and so we can copy an image, we can copy a snapshot, we can create an image. So it's a whole heap of stuff there that we can do. We can delete a whole VPC if we want, just from the command line. Not bad. So just see if there's something there that we can use. So we got here, okay, so just describe instances, we could use that, and that'll describe obviously what instances are on our account. So just Control C out of that and then clear the screen. And then we'll just use describe instances. Okay, so AWS EC2 describe instances, and that command should tell us what instances we've got available, and it'll come back as a JSON format. So I've specified JSON as a format that I like for viewing stuff like this. So there you can see it's listed all of the details about my AWS EC2 instances on this account, and which is pretty good. So we can have all that information that we just need to know what the ID of an instance is or something. We can just look up there, or the size of an instance. We can have a look, or the instance type, or whatever it is. We can just type in describe instances and get a lot of information about that. So there's a lot of commands there, and I'm not going to go through those obviously, but there's a lot of powerful stuff that you can do with the EC2 service. So let's have a look at creating a IAM user. So the command that we want for that is AWS and IAM service, create user, and then we do -- user -name, and then the name of the user that we're going to to create. So test CLI. We'll call this user test CLI so I can get rid of it quite easy later on. Just press enter for that, and we should be able to create a user with the IAM, and there we go. So it's created a user and it's returned in JSON format the object of that user, the username, test CLI, the path, the create date, and the unique ID of that IAM user. So we can use that unique ID if we can copy and paste that somewhere, or the ARN as well. So the ARN there, we can see ARN, AWS IAM, and then our account number, and then followed by user/test CLI, which is the user name. So that's pretty good. So now we can look at actually deleting that user as well. So the command we need to delete a user is very similar to the create user. So we just get the create user up again. But it's exactly the same, but instead of doing create user, we do delete user. So AWS IAM delete -user, and then --username followed by the name of that user. And so I'll just click enter and see what goes with that. So the command has been issued. It hasn't come back with anything because there are no errors, so that is a good thing. So we've created the user, we've deleted that user. There's a lot more that we can do with the IAM service, and I'm sure if you do AWS IAM help, you'll see that there's a whole heap of commands available for that service, along with all the other AWS services. So that brings me to the end of the session, the hands-on session on using command line interface, and you'll surely be using this a lot in the future in the course, and also in the future in your career as an AWS associate. So I look forward to you in the next lessons.